We are back with White Stallions of Lipizza, Chapter 18, A New World for Hans. Well, that sounds promising, doesn't it? It came as no shock when the stable master next morning told Hans he was wanted at once by Herr Hofrat in his office. A strange girl ushered him wordlessly down the stone passageway and into the beautiful reception room. She left him alone except for the dachshund, who looked up with half an eye, then went on snoring, her head resting on the colonel's white gloves. Again, she was a source of comfort. Hans longed to go over and touch her, but he restrained himself and sat down gingerly on one of the gilt chairs. He thought of Rosie and of his family, and he longed to crawl away and sneak home. He failed to hear the footsteps on the carpeted floor until the colonel was standing almost in front of him. Hans leapt to his feet, his face reddening. There was complete silence in the room. Then Colonel Podchowski suddenly laughed out loud. "Ja, ja, Hans," he said, his dark eyes twinkling. "I would not have missed last night's performance for all the coffee in Vienna." "Sir?" Hans's mouth fell open. "Sir?" The colonel looked at the boy's stricken face and realized what was troubling. "Ah, Hans," he said quickly, "Verina's unexpected performance was a sensation. The papers are loud in praise of him. It was a great triumph for Madame Giritza, too. The audience seemed to share it." "But what about the Herr Director?" Hans stammered. "Is he not furious with me?" The colonel's laugh was deep and hearty. "Is ever a director displeased if an audience demands 10 curtain calls? Then I am not fired? On the contrary, my message to you comes from both Madame Giritza and the Herr Director. Now that she knows what to expect from Verina, you are to roll up the carpet each night." "And after the opera closes?" Hans swallowed hard. "What then?" It seemed that the colonel had not heard, so dead silence hung in the room. So dead a silence hung in the room that the ticking of a tiny gold clock sounded like hammer strokes. The colonel turned to look at the hour, then without a word went over to the sofa, gently lifted the dachshund's head, and retrieved his gloves. Hans stood rigid, waiting. "The Reitschule will be closed for the summer," the colonel said at last. He pulled on his gloves, taking longer than necessary. After an eternity, he added, "Yes, you may report for training in the fall. The 1st of September comes on a Monday. You be here the night before. Then we shall find out if Hans Haupt has the endurance and courage required." Hans accepted the warm hand clasp, looked at the colonel, and seeing the future, he felt a frightening joy. So he is going to get to do what he has always wanted to do. Here's the little dachshund. I think I showed it earlier. She's cute.
Fancy? Aw.
The summer dragged by in an agony of waiting. Hans had to work for Henry. He went back to the delivery cart while Jacques had a summer of play. Occasionally, Hans caught a glimpse of the White Stallions being exercised in the outdoor arena between the high walls of the Hofburg, but it was disappointing. There were no aerial maneuvers at all. A groom simply rode one horse and led another alongside, and they just walked and jog-trotted as if they were all on vacation. The days fell away. July spun itself out. The first 2 weeks of August seemed without end. But of a sudden, as though someone had ripped the pages off the calendar, the summer was gone. On the eve of September, with his few clothes neatly packed in his father's old brown satchel, Hans presented himself at the Reitschule. Kurt Wagner, one of the apprentices, took him in tow. They had spoken to each other before, but now Hans felt himself scrutinized by a pair of sharp eyes that seemed to be measuring him for muscle and stamina. "Come this way." Kurt turned his head and led Hans up a dark stair that circled steeply. Together they entered a long, sparsely furnished room. 3 iron beds were lined up against one wall with a plain wooden chair beside each. 3 wooden wardrobes stood against the opposite wall, and in between were pegs for jackets and caps. In one corner there was a stove. In the other, a young man was pouring water from a pitcher into a basin. He was in his undershirt with a towel over his shoulder. "Herr Braun," Kurt addressed him with deference. "This is the new apprentice, Hans Haupt." Hans set down his satchel and stood at attention. Again he felt himself pinned and examined, like a butterfly on a drawing board. The man's voice was crisp, but kind. "Good evening, Hans. Kurt here is your senior in age and has had some previous training, and I myself am a writer candidate. So now you, instead of Kurt, will polish my boots." Hans' face lit up. He nodded happily. Nothing would be too little or too big. Herr Braun pointed to the bed farthest from the washstand. "That will be yours," he said. "And the wardrobe opposite. Morning bell at 5:30, downstairs at 6 for table duties." Then we have coffee and rolls up here before the morning lessons. We bring our own rolls, Kurt put in. You have a bakery, don't you? The best in Vienna, Hans said proudly, washing his brother-in-law out of his mind. And so at last, after years of waiting, Hans's new life had begun. He found the discipline stern, but the tasks simple. Wishfully, he had pictured himself on a horse the very first day, with Colonel Podhowski giving him individual instruction. Instead, he was to put to tasks that would have made him blush at home. Washing windows, polishing brass, sweeping the floor, dusting ledgers and railings, all of it he did with a fierce intensity, so he could be done with it. But there were other tasks which did satisfy him completely. On the first morning, he was assigned 3 horses to water and feed and groom. His old friend, the stable master, explained his duty. You will be responsible for 3 stallions, he said briskly, and he began naming the 3. Siglavi, Brenta, Neapolitano, Santuza, and the man slowly let his eyes travel over the stable, stall to stall. Hans could scarcely breathe. Had the man forgotten that he, Hans Haupt, knew Barina well and had taken him to and from the opera for days, watched over him like a mother? And just when the anguish was more than he could bear, the man's face creased into a grin. Your 3rd charge will be Maestoso Barina. Oh, Herr Stallmeister, how can I? The man chuckled. You can thank me by work, polishing brass and boots, cleaning tack better than anybody, washing leg bandages. That's how. Now, you may help feed. Postponing the exquisite moment of facing Barina, Hans gave the other 2 horses their grain first. Then he went empty-handed to Barina's stall. He stood very still in a moment of panic. Would Barina remember him, accept him in his new role, or would he be so eager for oats he would not care who fed him? Hans looked into the purple-brown eyes without saying a word. The stallion gazed back serenely, his nostrils opened wide, contracted and opened again. He gave a low, rumbly whinny, then with infinite grace came over and nudged Hans's shoulder. Hans was in paradise. From that instant, his life took on a wholly new meaning. He took care of his charges zealously. When he dealt out their grain, he rifled it between his fingers, sifting out any dust or weed seeds. When he watered his horses, he made certain the water was fresh and cool. When he combed tails, he used his fingers as a comb, separating each long hair so none would be pulled out. When he saddled, he led the pad carefully on the withers, then slid it on the back so that the body hairs were smoothed the right way. The vast stable and the room above it were Hans's world. He was almost completely happy, except that each morning he saddled Barina and walked him across the Josefplatz for someone else to ride. The man was Beriter Wittig. Hans envied him, hated him, worshipped him. He could make Barina dance and leap and march as if it were the stallion's idea and not his own. It looked so easy, so effortless. As the weeks passed, Hans began to chafe. A gnawing worry crept into his mind. When would he ever get to ride and learn the corbeille? He had not had a single word with Colonel Podhowski, had barely caught a glimpse of him. At night he thought of asking Kurt or Herr Braun, but always they were busy playing a never-ending game of chess, and Hans couldn't bring himself to put the question. So he kept on working and hiding his worry deep inside. Here's a picture of the room where the apprentices sleep. Here is Hans doing different work, things at work in this stable. Oh, and that's where we end, with Hans worried about what's going to happen in the future. We'll have to see later.